If you were playing games around the era of the Xbox or the PS2, you might mind that there were loads of middle-tier games. Indies weren't really a thing yet, but it wasn't all AAA first-party titles. There were games like Metal Arms, Glitch in the System, or Timesplitters, or Oddworld Stranger's Wrath. Back then the distinction wasn't as clear, but these titles didn't have quite the polish and production values of your Halos or your God of Wars. But they were weird and imaginative, experimental and fun. With the rise of indies and the inflation of AAA budgets, B-tier games seem to fade away. Nowadays it seems all you get is a mad expensive AAA game like the latest Call of Duty or a tiny basement indie like Minute. Well, that is about to change. Nowhere is this more obvious than with the games of Focus Interactive. They launched last year's Vampire, a gothic camp game whose ideas were held back by its budget, but which nonetheless managed to prove itself pretty interesting. This year they've launched A Plague Tale: Innocence, which has its rough edges but whose budget barely hampers what is a rich stealth and horror title about kids making their way through a rat-plagued medieval France. It doesn't quite compare to the big budget games like The Last of Us that have clearly inspired it, but it does nonetheless tell a poignant story about Big Sister Amicia's ascension into adulthood as she tries to care for her wee brother Hugo. If you've got siblings, I imagine a lot of the game's emotional beats will be familiar and strike a chord. They argue a lot, is what I'm saying. So it's a great game. But it's also a game that does weird things, like hinge its entire set of stealth mechanics on the presence of thousands of swarming rats, that often avoids combat and focuses more on puzzling and storytelling. It can get a little ropey at times, like with its daft spiky armour villains, but it also builds to an absolutely bonkers ending I won't dare spoil. It might lack the polish, but it's got ideas and a lot of heart. This doesn't feel like a game designed by committee, but rather the clear fruits of a developer's passion. So if you're sick of games that feel like they're made for a marketeer's checklist, then chase down some of these B-tier games, and see what happens when a game with a bigger budget than your average indie game gets made.